Hey everyone. Today we're going to be discussing about the mining protocol exploits and we're going to see why SV2 matters. So I'm bit-aloo. I'm currently funded by Hashrate to work full time on SV2. So yeah, let's begin. So the presentation we're going to be moving in this particular order. We will first start by understanding what pool mining is, how Stratum V1, the protocol which powers the pool mining works. Then we're going to be looking at the exploits, and then it will be a formal introduction to the SV2, moving on with how SV2 actually solves this particular problem, and how miners can expect more revenues from SV2. So, how pool mining works? So the notion of pool mining comes from the idea where multiple miners collaborate to find solution to a single block template. Block template is something what the pool generates, and then it actually decides the unique search space for each of these miners, and then it actually sends those jobs to them. These miners then actually mutate those particular jobs to get different variations of the block header, and based on that they find the difficulty. And if that difficulty is less than something what's called a shared difficulty. So shared difficulty is the difficulty what the pool decides for each of these miners. We're going to be looking at what that is in the next slides. And if a miner finds a variation of a block header which is less than the shared difficulty, so then miner is tend to find a share, which it actually submits to the upstream pool. And based on the number of shares the miner submits to the upstream pool, it gets the payouts. And if any of those particular shares, if they actually mine a block, so in that case the pool gets a payout via the coin-based transaction. We will be going into those details in the next slides. So what I really mean when I say the pool sends jobs to the downstream miners, what miners actually really do, and how does it make sense when I say the pool is the one which orchestrates the unique search space for each downstream miners? So there are a few fields inside the block header and the Coinbase which the miners can actually mutate to find different variations of the block header. Inside the Coinbase transaction, we don't really have any inputs, so the script part of it is kind of fully empty. So we have around 100 bytes there, out of which I guess like the 5 bytes are being taken up by I think 34 or something. I don't remember the bit there. But yeah, the rest of the bytes are free to be used by the miners. So now what the pool does is that pool actually uses a very unique value which is called the extranons 1 to make sure the search space for exploration for each of the miners are unique. And what do you mean by the search space? So search space is nothing but the extranons 2. The rest of the space in the Coinbase which the miner can actually use after the allocation of the extranons 1, what we see here. Then we have the end time and the nonces. Based on the mutation on that, the miner actually gets different variation of the block header. We also do have a few bits in the version, but that's something which is optional by specs. So I'm not really covering them here, but yeah. So once miners find different variation of these block headers by mutating extranons 2, end time and nonce, then it actually just hashes it out and just checks like whether the value what it's getting is it less than the shared difficulty of the connection between the miner and the pool. And if it is, then it finds the share and then finally submits it to the upstream pool. But what is the share? So as I mentioned, share is nothing much but like when we just double hash the block headers, we get a value. That value needs to be less than the difficulty what's being assigned by the pool for the connection between the pool and the miner. And if it's less than that, then the miner finally finds the valid share. And based on the number of valid shares, the miner actually submits to the upstream pool, it gets the payout. But at the same time, like if you might think, like based on all the variation of the block header, there might be a huge number of cases where you're going to be finding hashes which might be invalid, like it might not be less than the shared difficulty of the connection itself, and only a certain portion out of those particular block hashes going to be resulting in a valid share. And now how pool makes money out of it is like, if any of this share actually finds a block whose target is equal to the network difficulty, then that finally constitutes a block which can be propagated to the network. Usually the share difficulty is actually less than the network difficulty, just because to gauge the amount of work what the downstream miner is doing. So that's mostly the concept around it. Let's see how Stratum V1 works. So Stratum V1 is a protocol which powers the pool mining. So Stratum V1 protocol was introduced in 2012. It was a TCP-based protocol. It followed JSON 30 formats, and at the same time, it was a push-based solution. Because prior to this, all the pool mining solutions were polling-based, where the downstream miner polls the pool, like, hey dude, I need more templates, I have exhausted my server space. And yeah, that would lead to DOS vectors on the pool, making it useless, like rendered useless and not functional. So that was the reason why this was actually being introduced. Let's understand the Stratum V1 message flow to get a coherence around like how a protocol really helps the miner to get all the infos so that it can actually construct the block header and finally start mining shares. So as always, the very first connection what happens is the TCP three-way handshake. So that happens between the miner and the pool. Then the miner actually sends a mining subscribe message to the pool. And in return, the pool actually sends a response with an extra nonce 1, which defines the unique search space for the miner, and an extra nonce 2 length, which defines the range in the Coinbase, what the miner can actually mutate. Then we have mining authorize. So here the miner actually sends the username and password, letting the pool know, like all the shares what you're going to be receiving from me, it should be accounted for this particular username and password, or the account was there on the pool. Then the pool sets difficulty for the connection between the miner and the pool, and this is what actually defines the share difficulty, what the miner actually sets for the connection between the miner and the pool. The pool sets here. Then we receive mining notify. So mining notify, you can just think like pool is just sending a job to the miner for miner to mutate and find different solution to the block header. So it sends the version, the previous block hash, not a Merkle root, end time, end bits, and the nonce it doesn't really send because nonce is something what the miner needs to change. But it does send these hashes, like the Merkle hashes, for miner to actually calculate the Merkle root because miner will be changing the extra nonce too. At the same time, it also sends Coinbase 1 and Coinbase 2. Coinbase 1 is just transaction metadata, Coinbase 2 is the transaction output via which the pool finally gets paid out in case if a valid block comes in. Yeah. So till this point, like with this sequence of messages like mining subscribe, mining authorize, mining set difficulty, and mining notify, what all information the miner currently has. It knows almost all the fields of the block header, and it can just mutate nonce, end time, and the extra nonce too. And mutating them will lead to different variations of the block header, and hashing the block header will going to be giving it the target value or the difficulty. And once it actually finds a valid solution or a valid solution to a share, it then sends a mining submit message, which is just the end time, nonce, and the extra nonce too. The reason why it only sends this is because pool has all the other information by which it can actually construct the whole block altogether. Yeah, so I think now all of us do understand like how this actually works and how messages are being exchanged in the protocol itself to form a block header and finally get a target value for each mutations. So now let's look into the exploits. So when I mentioned about the Stratum V1, I didn't really mention that the connection between them is unencrypted. So what does that mean and how does that affects a system like a mining infra? So if the connection between them is unencrypted, so now what happens, like any node in the network mesh between the miner and the pool can actually sniff through the messages. It can actually block them or mutate them in between. So that's kind of very sketchy, and at the same time, when it makes the whole infra very vulnerable. We're going to be seeing that what are the possible attack vectors to that. But something like this, like so now what happens, like any node between them can, or like any attacker between them can actually steal the hash rate or the work done by the miner for a specific pool for its own benefit. And that usually leads to around a couple of % of effective hash rate being lost, and ultimately leading to the depletion of the mining revenue, which miners should have earned. So let's look at the concept of around hash rate hijacking. So now here what really happens is that the attacker sits in between the miner and the ledger pool. It let miners send the traffic to the ledger pool, but for a very short time segment, it also sets the hash rate or to a even, like not the even pool, but the pool which actually benefits the attacker. So in here, what you see is that the attacker doesn't really do any work, like it's not incurring any operational cost for the miner is incurring to even set up the whole mining system. It's just using very smart sniffing, just directing the hash rate by the miner to a different pool which benefits the attacker and not the miner. So let's look at the very first set of attack, which is the job injection architecture. So here what really happens is that the attacker connects to the attacker's pool, which actually is registered to the attacker's name. It then, what it does is that it actually stores all the initial set of messages, what we saw in the bootstrap phase, or when I was explaining the HTML message flow. It stores the extra amounts once, which is something very specific to the pool and defines a unique search space for this particular entity. Then there's extra amounts to length, like the amount of time for the miner can actually mutate in the byte-based transaction. The set difficulty for the connection between the attacker pool and the attacker, and the miner notified, like all the jobs what it has. So now how it actually really works is that the attacker lets the miner bootstrap its connection with the pool, which actually pays to the miner. Then the miner starts submitting the shares, but now what happened for a very short period of time, the attacker sends the extra amounts values, which it actually received from the attacker's pool, and then just send a mining.set extra amounts. So set extra amounts is just a protocol message which is not really very judiciously being followed by all the implementations. Only very few implementations do follow it, but for the ones which does, are susceptible to this particular attack. So now what happens is that the attacker sets or sends a set extra amounts message to the miner, and because of which now what happens is that the Coinbase to which the miner going to be mutating the states going to be following the unique search space what the attacker pool gives to the attacker. Then all the cache messages what the attacker had from the attacker's pool, it's just gonna be sending it to the miner. And then miner starts mining for the attacker's pool, and by this the attacker starts getting paid. So that's the idea of the job injection attack. But at the same time, like these attacks are not, it won't persist throughout the cycle of the miner. It only persists for a very short time so that the miner doesn't really get to know if someone is attacking them or not. Then we have a time segment attack. This is one of the easiest attacks, but at the same time it's very easy to even detect this as well. So now what happens is that the attacker lets the miner connect to the pool and start off with its operation, start sending shares and stuff. But then what happened during the operation, it actually disconnects the miner to the pool, and when miner tries to reconnect, it actually let the miner connect to the pool, which actually benefits the attacker. So miner sends the same set of the bootstrap messages, subscribe, subscribe, authorize, gets the notify from the pool. But now what happens, like in the authorization message itself, the attacker actually injects his own username and password. So now all the shares what the miner would have received is now being accounted for the attacker's account on the pool. And then again, it actually disconnects and let the pool mine with the ledger pool, which actually pays the miner. So these are just the timed attacks. These are not something which persist all across the connections. But even these very short time attacks lead to a huge revenue loss for the miners, because the mining infra itself is very, in fact, the mining industry itself is very low on very profits. Like, instance that just a couple of percent or just 10%. And even in that, if something like this happens, it really adversely affects the miner's revenue. But at the same time, like, this is not just a threat to the miners, but also to Bitcoin, because mining is the base layer by which the block generation happens. If something like that, or the protocol which actually powers something like that, is it if it's itself susceptible to censorship, the whole network becomes less censorship resistant. So now what happens is that the government can actually block such messages ever flow across the intranet there in the country altogether, and banning the mining altogether in a particular region. So suddenly now a region of the world is no longer able to mine. That's something which is very risky and kind of make the decentralization at risk, but at the same time increases the censored control over the network. So that's not pretty good. So yeah, so let's talk about SV2 and how it actually solves all the attacks what we have seen till now. So SV2 by design is encrypted and authenticated. Like, these are two very important words there. So now, all the man-in-the-middle attacks what we observed for the SV1 are no longer possible. And at the same time, no one can actually sniff through any of the messages being sent by the miner in the pool. So how SV2 prevents the exploits, like how this encryption infra actually works, and it actually authenticates the right set of pool. So yeah, so to actually encrypt any message, if you think, you need to share a secret between both the entities. Like, miner needs to know a secret, and the pool also need to know a secret. Like, both of them needs to share a secret. Then only they can actually encrypt a message, and the other party can actually decrypt it. But even to know a secret, they need some way to actually share the secret in an untrusted environment. And the way that happens is that, so let's think about the very naive way where the miner just sends the pool the secret. But the issue with this particular scheme altogether is like the attacker can still look into the secrets, and then you're back to square one, where the attacker can literally look onto all of your messages, even though you actually are encrypting and decrypting it. So that doesn't really help in any way. So with this, we know we need to have a shared secret between the pool and the miner, but in a way such that even if attackers sniff through the messages, it won't be able to guess the shared secret. So how can we do that? So there's a very popular algorithm, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which helps us to mitigate the issue what's being presented here. So in Diffie-Hellman key exchange for shared secrets, what we actually do is that both the entities are going to be generating their set of private and the public keys, and they're going to be exchanging the public keys altogether. And because of which, now what happens, like, even if the attacker listens to these public keys, it won't be able to actually compute the shared secret because it doesn't know the private key of these entities. So that's how we solve the problem of sharing a secret in an untrusted environment, but there's still a problem, like a couple of problems to them. Like, how would the miner know the public key what is actually receiving from the pool? It actually comes from the pool. Like anyone can actually send a public key across the network. So yeah, so we are encrypted now, but the issue is this. So what if an attacker actually comes in between and sends its public key to the miner and its public key to the pool? And again, MITM is possible in this case. So even though we have a shared secret scheme, but still, like, kind of, we are again back to square one. The attacker can still look into all the messages and stuff, and yeah, it's kind of very dicey. So there are two set of problems here. Apart from this, there's another problem, like what if an attacker actually mutates the bytes what's being sent between the miner and the pool? How would the other entity know if there's any mutation being done in the messages or not? So these two problems are very common, like they come into the category of key authenticity and data integrity. So we're going to be seeing that how SV2 solves this. Yeah, so we do static key pairing for the pool. So now each of these pool or any of the server which we actually do know is going to be having a public identity which is now pinned to a public key altogether. So now the miner actually knows the static public key of the pool, and it can just send its own public key and just start with the encrypted connection. But at the same time, like there's this whole concept like what if the static public key or the private key associated to the static public key gets compromised? So in that case, like what we do here is that we like after this particular set of connections, we come up with the whole concept of the session keys, which maintain the forward secrecy and at the same time are double ratchet, who stays on and on with all the messages being shared to and fro. So by this we solve the issue of key authenticity, because now the miner knows the entity to which it's connecting is surely the pool because it knows its public key which is actually pinned to its identity. Yeah. And for data integrity, we just compute the map back and then just append it to the message altogether. And yeah, if any maliciation happens to either the message or the tag, the other party would know it because the map tags won't match. So that's how we solve the problem of data integrity. There's a lot of different stuff which happens, but yeah, for simplicity, that's the case. So yeah, so all the procedure what I actually walked you through actually comes under this one of the NX variant scheming of the noise protocol framework, and that's what we actually use for Stratum V2 to actually encrypt and authenticate the connections. So yeah, so I have an article on this, like if you are interested in learning more about this, you can actually have a look here. I have detailed it out like how we do it in Stratum V2 and what's the basic intuition around it. Now we'll see like how more avenues are with SV2 and not with SV1. So we recently conducted a study with HashLabs, and yeah, there we found that running a whole mining setup, or industrial mining setup with SV2 leads to around 7.8% increase in revenues. At the same time, reduction in the operational cost. Yeah. So considering with just one of the aspects of encryption by Stratum V2, we are actually able to recover all the lost profit which would have been lost, which is lost by the hash rate hijacking, which amounts to almost around the 5% of the total profit what the miner actually generates. But at the same time, like this is just one of the aspects of Stratum V2. Stratum V2 has a lot of different positive stuff to it, like we have binary framing, we have block template generation on the client sides. We have very low latent connection, like the message passes between the entities altogether. So in a way, SV2 does increase miner revenues, but at the same time it decreases the operational cost incurred by the miners. And that's something which is a pain point for the miners. So we don't really do just the technical stuff, like all the technical stuff what are there with SV2 are not just very tech fancy stuff. It's very thoroughly researched and keeping in mind the miners' benefit. But at the same time, it also helps with making Bitcoin more decentralized, because okay, if you are fixing the mining layer altogether, the whole aspect around the censorship resistance, decentralization actually just gets fixed. What was not there because of the SV1. So yeah, the key takeaways here are like the miner profit increases. There's less operational cost, which are very good for the miners. The decentralization and censorship, making the Bitcoin more decentralized and less censored. Yeah, thank you. Questions? Yes.
How much has is actually being stolen? What do we know about that?
So it's around a couple of percent of effective hash power. But yeah, if you really want to understand like what's the exact numbers, like we have this case study here, but you can actually do that.
I think that whatever numbers we have there, they're best guesses, right? It's like somebody did some kind of statistical analysis, they did some kind of probing, and they estimate, yeah, it's probably this percentage being stolen, but it's hard to.
But has any of that stuff ever been like investigated, prosecuted?
Yeah, there's a paper published on a conference called Black Hat Conference in 2020. 2021, and that like they were formalizing all of this methodology.
Yes,
Bill just presented here, and but on the other hand, it's hard to measure. There's not a lot, right? So we can only estimate and do some kind of statistical guessing.
Yeah, I mean, only if you, I mean, some of these attacks look obvious if you get disconnected once every 100 seconds for 1 second, and then reconnected after 1 second. You should, pay attention to your router probably.
Yeah. But I don't. It's been a while that I last looked at that article. Bill probably read it more recently. So do they probe the network?
Yes.
Yeah. So those numbers, those estimations were.
It's literally just ongoing.
Yes, yeah.
But is it evenly distributed? I mean, I could imagine like super serious, publicly listed companies carefully make sure it doesn't happen. And Joe Miner in the basement is the victim. Or?
There's a lot of people like NiceHash is doing TLS.
Yes. I think even Breeze is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like Mara firmware. I think Mara just released a firmware that supports TLS.
So you do need to.
So the anti-Stratum V2 people, the people that think that Stratum V2 is a brains conspiracy, they go for Stratum V1 with TLS.
Okay, but so some of the firmware supports TLS, but it tends to be the aftermarket firmware then.
Yeah.
And Google prefers to not.
Yeah, I would assume that not every upstream will support that.
Well, yeah, you needed that firmware and you needed that pool.
Yeah, certificate, authority, all the things that come with TLS. Centralization.
Yeah, that's the reason why noise. We use noise with SV2.
But it's also just a lot lower weight, easy to implement.
Yeah.
I mean, implementing all of HTTPS on some embedded router system is not a good idea.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
I would read about noise because I don't know too much about
It's
it.
really interesting.
Yeah. But I was puzzled about that static key in thing you showed.
Yeah.
Because like there's no like a public infrastructure for this kind of thing. So I was just like, is that really safe? Like how does it work? Can you explain that?
So what we do there is that like we are actually pinning the public key to the identity of the pool there. So now what happens, like let's suppose someone gets a private key in that public key, and for some reason now they do control what the pool actually sees with the miner itself. But we also do follow the notion of forward secrecy. So once you actually establish that basic connection, then you only actually generate a session key altogether. And now what really happens there is that each of these session keys make sure they follow forward secrecy and they are double ratchet. So what does that mean? Like each message is what you actually send or receive. It actually updates the state of the keys altogether. So even if the private key or the static public key gets compromised, because that can happen, like that very possibly can happen, you really don't want any external attacker to actually get through all the messages and understand all the messages that are being transferred to them through. But at the same time, like, they do also rotate their public keys as well. Like what they actually pin to the pools.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I have one more, that's okay.
Sure.
So I was thinking like when you explain, because like you put the man in the middle and then you showed the like ISP/conference.
Yeah.
Because then obviously like they sit in the middle of the connection, right? But is there like any other like known like approach, for example, like people with like rogue ASs, you know, like the AI. Yeah, that's one, but also like, I'm just like, do you know of any other like attack that happened? Like, not just ISP or wrong, but something like that.
I'm not very sure about like if any such attack has happened on my infra.
Yeah.
Okay, like these are like very speculative and can be very easily be done. Because these packets, like as soon as any of your node actually receives it, like the modem and stuff, they can actually interpret it like just with the flip. So it should be very, very easy to actually do that. Like even in this particular facility, we can do it.
Yeah, any autonomous system that your package goes through can do this middle attack.
Yes.
I don't know what the typical actual routes are, but that's probably not.
Mm-hmm.
You probably just goes to Amazon and then Amazon.
I mean, China keeps banning mining every year over year, right?
But that makes it hard for them to do any kind of metal in the middle because that means the miners just use VPNs out of China. So then at least the CCP can take the hash rate. So they should just legalize banning and take 1%.
It's more clever.
That's
Cool. Question? You can go, Cheese.
Okay. So the share secret between the miner and the pool is like constantly rotated in every session of conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long those sessions last, or is something that they can decide?
Yes, it's around I guess 6:55, like 6:55 seconds after which we actually refresh the certificates.
Okay.
Should.
Yeah, I will speak more on this later.
Yeah. How easy in a real world scenario is for these exploits to be applied? First, in the SV1 side.
I think we are in action even as we speak. We just don't know.
But if it is so easy, why there are not so many miners going bankrupt because everybody is stealing their shares?
So the thing that like these attacks are not something which persist all along, like all across the time, like the lifetime of the miner. They just steal a very specific percent of hash rate and then they do it for all like whatever mining they can actually cash.
So that miners also lose money in stale shares in general, right? I don't know what percentage that is.
With SV2, they consider like we have very low latency systems, which can be because we follow the binary framing. I think the number of stage shares, we have not really seen them much with our implementation. But
In SV1, like the average is 0.2%.
0.2%?
Yeah.
Okay, so
The
that's,
industry average is that.
well, okay, but if
So it
theft
means
is
that-
several percent and stale shares like a fraction of a percent, then theft is the biggest problem.
Well, there's a game theory involved with the SV1 hijacking, right? Because you cannot steal too much, otherwise
they don't have to know.
Yeah, I think that the percentage is there, but just sort of an example.
Yeah.
I think that in reality that there's like maybe 0.5% at most. The stealing of shares. Yeah. So that if it adds up with like 0.2, 0.3% of stale shares, it's still something like.
Yeah, it's in the same ballpark.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question.
Yeah, sure.
The path key of the pool is static?
Yes.
Okay.
But we do rotate it like after some time because even that kind of compromise.
Okay. Do you know if like some of the pools are using Nostr like with the path key as their identity, or it's not something happening right now?
No idea at all.
Okay.
Yeah, Nostr adoption in my industry, there's like very fringe experimental stuff that we're playing with eCache and perhaps Nostr to some extent, not necessarily in this cryptography application, but it's just people playing with code. There's no real adoption.
The thing is though, people, if you're mining and you want to use a pool, you need to usually sign up for that pool, go to their website. So at that point, you're already relying on ACS to trust that that pool is who they say they are, and then on that website, it's going to be their public key for their identity, which you copy into your config settings once until they send an email like, hey, we got compromised, please get a new key.
Yeah.
So I don't think Nostr would help here, but
yeah, I think Nostr does provide with those push notification what you guys are working on.
Yeah, like.
So then it sounds like
No, but I was thinking more about like as well trust. Like if you got like an identity Nostr that already has a lot of trust, then that could be helpful. But it's rotated, then Nostr has now been rotating it.
But yeah, that's a very nice way to put it forward. So, yeah, pretty cool. Getting out the Nostr copies. Any more questions? But yeah, if you have any other questions like this, do reach out to all the people who wear this t-shirt. Yeah, so.